Imagine standing on the side of Casper Mountain in the dead of winter, where the wind and tea just blow it bite through layers of wool and skin until your bones feel like ice. In the late 1970s, a man named Chuck Hall stood on this frozen ground with a plan that made his neighbors think he had finally lost his mind, while everyone else was building traditional timber-framed houses with thick insulation and massive furnaces. Chuck was unloading giant sheets of corrugated steel, the kind used for cheap military warehouses. He wasn't building a shed or a garage. But here was the kicker. He wasn't building it on the ground. He was burying it. Locals called it the tin can. And the betting pool in town was unanimous. Chuck Hall was going to freeze to death before the first snowfall even hit its peak. They watched him dig a massive trench into the rocky Wyoming soil, drop in a Quonset hut, and then, in an act that seemed like pure insanity, he began piling tons of dirt right on top of it. The mystery wasn't just why he was doing it, but how he expected to survive. You see, Casper, Wyoming, is one of the harshest environments in the lower 48 states. We are talking about temperatures that routinely dip to minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit, with wind chills that can turn a human being into a popsicle in minutes. To the traditional builders in the area, Chuck's project looked like a tomb. They saw the thin steel ribs of the Quonset hut and knew that metal is one of the worst insulators on the planet. It conducts cold straight through. They laughed at the idea that a tin can could hold back the weight of the earth, let alone the freezing grip of a Wyoming winter. But Chuck Hall wasn't a gambler. He was a man who understood a secret about the earth that the rest of the world had forgotten. He wasn't fighting the cold. He was hiding from it. He had a theory that if he went deep enough, the laws of thermodynamics would flip in his favor. As the structure took shape, the skepticism turned into genuine concern from the community. People would drive by just to shake their heads at the sight of this silver archway disappearing under a mound of brown dirt. Chuck didn't have a massive construction crew or a multi-million-dollar budget. He had a vision of passive annual heat storage. He believed he could trap the warmth of the summer sun and save it for 6 months. It sounded like science fiction in 1977. While his neighbors were stocking up on expensive heating oil and bracing for $500 monthly utility bills, Chuck was calmly sealing his steel seams. He knew that the first real storm was coming, and that storm would be the ultimate judge of his crazy idea. If he was wrong, the weight of the dirt would crush him, or the cold would seep through the steel and turn his dream into an icebox. But if he was right, he was about to discover a way to live for free while the rest of the world shivered. Transition. Slow zoom on the finished mound of dirt. As the first snowflakes fall, the clouds began to bruise into a deep purple gray, and the first big one of the season rolled over the mountains. The temperature plummeted 40 degrees in a matter of hours. As the town of Casper buttoned up their coats and cranked their thermostats, they looked up toward Chuck's Hill, wondering if they'd need to send a rescue party in the morning to dig out a frozen man. But inside that buried steel arch, something was happening that defied every bit of common sense the neighbors held dear. The blizzard hit with a ferocity that shut down the mountain roads. But inside Chuck Hall's buried Quonset hut, the scene was eerily quiet. There was no roaring furnace, no clicking of electric heaters, and no whistling of wind through the cracks of a wooden door. In fact, Chuck was sitting in his living room, stripped down to a light shirt, watching the thermometer. Outside, the air was a lethal minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit. If you touched a piece of metal outside, your skin would instantly bond to it. But inside Chuck's tin can, the temperature was holding steady at a shocking 65 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a 85-degree difference from the outside air. How was this possible? The secret lay in the dirt. Chuck hadn't just buried a house. He had created a thermal battery by covering the Quonset hut with several feet of earth and then extending a skirt of insulation out away from the house under the soil. He had decoupled the structure to the massive thermal mass of the mountain itself. The concept was brilliant in its simplicity. The earth stays at a relatively constant temperature once you get a few feet down, usually around 50 to 55 degrees. By insulating the ground around the house, Chuck prevented the summer heat from escaping and the winter cold from soaking in. The earth acted like a giant sponge that soaked up the heat during the July sun and slowly, ever so slowly, released it into the cabin during December. While the neighbors were burning wood and oil just to keep their living rooms at 60 degrees, Chuck was basking in the stored energy of the previous summer. The crazy man wasn't just warm, he was comfortable. He had achieved the holy grail of architecture, a home that regulated its own temperature. But it wasn't just about the heat, it was about the pressure. Everyone expected the Quonset hut to buckle under the weight of the Wyoming soil, which can weigh thousands of pounds per square foot when wet or frozen. Chuck had used the natural geometry of the arch to his advantage. The Quonset shape is one of the strongest structures known to man, distributing weight downward and outward into the foundation. Instead of fighting the mountain, The house became part of it. As the winter raged on, word started to trickle down into Casper. Visitors who braved the snow to check on him were stunned. They would walk through a small, insulated tunnel and emerge into a bright, spacious, and incredibly warm interior. There was no dampness, no basement smell, and most importantly, no utility bill. Chuck was proving that a $3,000 surplus military shell could outperform a $100,000 custom-built mansion. He began keeping meticulous logs of the temperatures, proving that his home stayed 55 to 60 degrees warmer than the outside air without a single log being burned. Transition. Night shots of the mountain. Quiet and still. But as the fame of the Casper Mountain Earthship grew, a new challenge emerged. Living underground is one thing for a few days, but what about the long-term effects? The skeptics shifted their goalposts. They started saying, sure, he's warm, but he's living in a dark, moldy hole. He'll go crazy from the lack of light before the winter is over. They didn't even realize that Chuck had one more trick up his sleeve, a design feature that would change the way we think about green building forever. Section 3. A legacy etched in steel and soil. Chuck Hall didn't live in a dark hole. He had designed his Quonset home with a massive south-facing glass wall that acted like a giant solar collector. Even in the dead of winter, the low-hanging sun would pour through the glass, hitting the back wall of the hut and charging the thermal battery even further. He had light, he had warmth, and he had a view of the Wyoming wilderness that most people only saw on postcards. He had successfully combined 1940s military surplus technology with ancient earth-sheltering techniques to create a home that was essentially off-grid before that term even existed. Chuck's home became a pilgrimage site for architects and DIY builders. He proved that you didn't need to be a millionaire to survive the harshest climates on Earth. You just had to be smart enough to work with nature instead of against it. The legacy of the Chuck Hall house lives on today in the Earthship movement and the resurgence of Quonset hut homes across the American West. His experiment taught us that the most powerful heater in the world is UNT, a furnace it S, the ground beneath our feet. He lived in that home for years, laughing all the way to the bank as he saved tens of thousands of dollars in energy costs. He showed us that crazy is often just a word people use for someone who sees a solution they are UNT, brave enough to try. The man in Casper, Wyoming, didn't just build a house. He built a blueprint for a future where we don't have to be slaves to the power grid. He proved that even a tin can be a palace if you have the vision to bury it. If you found Chuck's story as mind-blowing as I did, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. We dive deep into the stories of forgotten innovators and the madmen who actually changed the world every single week. It helps the channel out a ton and ensures you never miss a story of human ingenuity. And hey, I want to hear from you in the comments. If you could build a home anywhere, would you go underground to save on the bills? Or do you need that traditional rooftop over your head? Let's get a discussion going below. Thanks for watching. And remember, sometimes the craziest ideas are the ones that keep us the warmest. I'll see you in the next one. Would you like me to generate a thumbnail concept or a list of tags and a description for this video?